650, Michael Cohen, 1320 WILS. Well, everyone's talking about discipline, especially the discipline of children, now that Adrian Peterson has lost his position with the Minnesota Vikings. And the question is, at what point does discipline turn into real abuse? Well, Lori Vann is a licensed professional counselor online. It's LoriVannCounseling.com. She knows a lot about this. She deals with a lot of young people and their issues. Lori, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Now the issue of spanking itself. Do you have a definitive view on this, if this is right or wrong to spank a child?
I don't think spanking is inherently evil, but there are absolute guidelines that have to be followed if you choose to use that method of discipline, and can definitely lay out all the guidelines that I think should be present.
Gotcha. Now you're down there in Texas. That's where Adrian Peterson grew up, and he says it was kind of just part of life, that this using of a switch. Have you heard of such a thing down there?
Well, unfortunately, I think that is a true statement, and I know people that grew up in the southern part of the state, and especially in some of the poor areas of the state that are on that Texas-Louisiana border, and that, yes, the use of switches did and does still take place, and it's just a lack of education and proper training.
Gotcha. Now, that in itself, is that abuse, or can that also be done in a way that is constructive?
Well, my guideline on spanking is that it does depend on the instrument that you're going to use. And if you're going to use a switch, a tree branch or something, I have a lot of concerns about that, just because you have an increased risk of lacerations, as in the case with Adrian Peterson, that you can look at that child's legs, there are cuts all up and down those. And where it becomes abuse, or some of the guidelines I use, is that anytime you draw blood, anytime there are welts or there's severe bruising, that becomes reportable as abuse. Instruments that I think are fine to use, an open hand on the buttocks. A belt isn't inherently bad, but you can't have the buckle touch the skin, because again, the buckle can do more severe bruising or even cut the skin.
Right. Now, when do you treat families where you have a mom and a child or a parent come in together, that kind of thing?
Oh, yes. I've done plenty of family counseling, and I have unfortunately had my share of child abuse cases over the years where things really cross the line, because I don't think everything's black and white.
And
I think there's a lot of gray.
And how does that work? So a parent will acknowledge that they do discipline a child, and do you just, as they're talking, do you tell them, wow, what you're doing is just abuse?
Thankfully, I've not had tons of those type of cases. Oftentimes, it's one of the parents that brings in the kid, and as I'm meeting with the child and they're going through and I'm getting more and more details, then I talk to the parent that brought them in, because that's not usually the parent that's doing it. It's usually their spouse or it's an ex-spouse. And I say, by the law, I have no choice on this. This is exactly what your kid has told me, and this is going into serious physical harm. I have to report this. Typically, if the parent has been investigated by CPS, then they get referred to their own counseling, and CPS gets involved with all that, and usually through an advocacy center or another facility.
Okay, now is spanking in any way potentially helpful to the behavior and future behavior of a child?
Well, and again, I think if you follow the guidelines, if you do it properly, it's not this horrible, damaging thing. But the key thing is you cannot do any discipline, whether that be spanking or you're getting in a discussion with, then it becomes a fight, when you're angry, because once you're angry, you're thinking with the emotional side of your brain. You're not thinking logically. And when we're emotional, we're more likely to be impulsive and to go further than what we would have done normally. So if you are going to spank a child, you cannot be angry. You need to do your own time out.
Right.
You need to calm down.
How often, if you're going to be spanking a child, how often should that be happening if it's helping things?
It should not happen often. Spanking really should be one of the last resorts. It should be really, you've gone through all of the different levels of discipline prior to that. And I've spoken with so many people that they had been spanked as a child, and they weren't frequently spanked because it was effective. They understood that I have crossed the line, how it was done was proper. They learned their lesson, and they were able to move on. But it was used as more of a last resort. Mm-hmm. It was done as a discussion for us to say, hey, this is the consequence you're going to get if you do this.
Now, those that believe in absolutely no physical discipline, is that realistic? Is that for everyone? Can that actually be instituted across all of us?
I think it can be difficult depending on the child and their personality. It depends on the age, because honestly, if you're dealing with a toddler, a 2-year-old, you can't sit them down and rationalize with them. You can't explain, and this is the exact reason why this is happening. Because for a child, they're more about association at that age. That I try to go touch the hot stove, I get my hand popped really quickly. I now form a connection pretty quickly of, if I touch this, I get this. Mm-hmm. And obviously, as a child gets older, you change the type of discipline that's used because they do have cognitive development that takes place. They're better able to understand the reasoning behind the discipline.
No, is it generally the case of if you're spanking in a way that is reasonable, the way you described, that it's not causing serious mental trauma to a child?
I have come across plenty of people, and in talking with my interns too, and they're like, we were all raised, we all got spanked, and I don't think any of us are mentally damaged. None of us have anger issues. None of us have abused children. None of us have done anything of a questionable nature, because we had parents that knew how to do it properly, and it wasn't done out of anger. It was done out of love. It was never abusive. There were guidelines, and we knew that that was sort of the final thing. We had really crossed the line, that we had warnings, right, that we had timeouts, and we pushed the limits, and the parents said, okay, and we told you in advance this is what's going to happen.
Well, it's interesting. That's what Adrian Peterson's mom came out and said in a statement, that switching this way is a sign of love when it's done by someone who cares about you, to prepare you for, the realities of life. So what do you take away from this when you see, I guess, the way the child's legs were hurt in this case? Is this abuse, or is this something kind of in between there?
This is absolutely abuse, without a doubt, because there were lacerations. You have bleeding. I would imagine that you have welts. I didn't see them in the pictures, but I would assume so. And you're going to have severe bruising. So absolutely, this was abuse. And the thing to understand is that if you don't discipline your child at all, whether that be with the spanking or with timeouts or with groundings, lack of discipline is a lack of love.
Well,
and I have come across plenty of kids that have not been shown love because they've been able to get away with whatever they want. There were no boundaries.
It's Lori Vann, licensed professional counselor. The website, LoriVannCounseling.com. Lori, thank you so much.
Thank you.